Welcome to There Is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell, and I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I am the owner of Maxwell's fitness programs, and I've been in business since 1994. The purpose of this podcast is to get to the real deal of what really works, and most importantly, why things work. Hence the name, There Is a Method to the Madness. Before I get started today, let me thank Jonathan and Lynn Gilden of the Gilden Group Realty Pros. They are committed to providing the highest level of customer service in home sales. Why don't you give them a shout and figure out what your home is worth? 386-451-2412. What was the biggest health and fitness nutrition trend that you can remember going way back? What was the very first trend you can remember? So for me, it was in the 80s, and the Fit or Fat books were coming out, and all of the low-fat, non-fat living styles were like really big. Now, I was alive before the 80s, but I was too young to really pay attention to what the trends were at the time. But the biggest one I can remember when I started to really pay attention to health and fitness, because I was now getting into it, was the eat fat and you will get fat trend. Now, that has been drastically replaced with the eat carbs and you will get fat trend. But the first one I remember is the fat. So that's the one macronutrient I haven't covered in the last 2 weeks. So I'm going to pick up with that today. Let's learn all about fat, more than you maybe wanted to know. But that shouldn't be the case, because we really should want to know about the foods that we eat. Now, before I get any further, I want to clarify something. Both of them are trends that were pushed in marketing, but it's not like the dietitians suddenly did an about face. That's just not true. I want to clear that myth up really quick. When you hear people say, well, they keep changing their mind on this stuff. You know, fat's good, fat's bad. Carbs are good, carbs are bad. No, they don't. Marketing finds an edge to sell you things. We've known, and when I say we, it's the people who have been educated in the field or very experienced in the field, know right from wrong when it comes to this stuff. So let me say there's no truth to fat will make you fat, other than the fact that it's more calorically dense. And there's no truth to carbs will make you fat unless you eat too many of them. So I know, well, I shouldn't say that, but I think you want to hear something come out differently eventually from me that will say that there is a magical macronutrient that you can eat all you want of, and if you just avoid this. But you know what? I don't think so, and I know it's not going to come out of my mouth now because it's just not true. There is no miracle macronutrient that you can eat all that you want of, and all you have to do is not eat this other thing. No, we do have to learn moderation and some form of self-control or control with getting help. But there is no magic and there is no evil macronutrient either. So let's talk about fat. Fat is one of the big four macronutrients, with carbohydrates, protein, and water being the other three. And it's macro-essential nutrients, not because we need them. We do, but that's not what the essential means. The essential means that they have to come from outside of the body because your body just won't make it. So those are the big four. I've covered protein recently. I have covered carbohydrates. I'm now going to cover fat. So it is one of the big four. Its primary purpose is to provide long-term energy. That's what adipose tissue is. So adipose tissue is fat. It's fat that we store, and we store it for long-term energy. All right. That's what it's there for. It gets broken down and utilized for fuel. Now, we mostly use fat for energy during rest. So right now, as I'm sitting in my home office making this podcast, and I am leaning on my knees because that's how I like to kind of relax when I speak into my microphone. I'm sitting in my good old fashioned farm style kitchen chair. And that's the amount of the work I'm doing. You know, I bobbing back and forth a little bit because I like to move a little bit when I talk, but I'm not exactly at high intensity. So I'm using fat for fuel. We use fat at no resting intensities, no intensity or resting intensity, and at very low intensity. So when we're out on a walk and our heart rate is staying down, we're using almost complete fat for fuel, like 99% fat for fuel with some carbohydrates to spark it. The higher we go up the energy ladder or the intensity ladder, the more we start using carbohydrates for fuel. So we use fat at low to resting intensities. That's the primary purpose of fat. The other purpose of it, the other main two, is simply protection, cushion. We need it. We need to protect ourselves. And the other is we need enough fat to help us make our hormones. Our endocrine system relies on fat to help produce. For example, cholesterol, all right, is a sterol, which is a type of fat. So steroids is a type of hormone, right? So that's short for, well, not short for, but that's a synthetic version of testosterone, which is a hormone. So we need fats to help us produce hormones. Sometimes when we're having issues in our endocrine system, we might be too deficient in fat. Now, in the United States, that's not as common. We tend to eat a pretty high fat diet compared to other parts of the world. Alaska, Alaska, which of course is part of the United States, but at the same time, it's a very different culture than us, actually consume some of the most dietary fat in the world. So, you know, there's that little, you know, maybe useless piece of information, but I think it's pretty cool when we look at what people eat. So sterols is a type of fat. So just think of steroids, think of hormones. I'm just trying to put it all together for you so you can understand that we need enough fat to help us with our endocrine system. But again, the note here for the United States is we tend to eat enough of that. So may or may not be your issue. Not really sure on that. But that is the purpose of fat. Now, another thing is fat has 9 calories per gram, whereas carbohydrates only have 4 calories per gram. Protein has 4 calories per gram of protein. Alcohol has 7 calories per gram of alcohol. Now, alcohol, I hate to break it to you, ladies and gentlemen, is not an essential nutrient. We don't need it, okay? So there is that, but it is calorically dense. So the reason why that's important and the reason why I stress that is because early on in the old 80s, as I spoke on, and when I first got to college and started working on graduate school, we were coming out of that a little bit, but it was still very prevalent. And the thought was that, well, the thought in the marketing department was that if you eat very, very low fat to non-fat, you will lose weight. And the thinking was, again, because it's so calorically dense. And it is. So basically, there's 2 times the amount of calories in the same size level of a carbohydrate or a protein. So like if you open up your hand and grab a handful of lettuce, for example, just grab a handful of lettuce, right? Or spinach, flip your hand over, and however much that is going to equate to maybe like 20 calories, right? I mean, just think of it this way. Very simple what we mean by calorically dense. Now, take the same hand, reach into the old almond bowl and grab a handful of almonds, flip your hand around. That's most likely, depending on the size of your hand, is going to be 2 servings. So that's going to be about 360, 370 calories in just a handful of almonds, right? So, man, you like there's no comparison between the caloric density of fat compared to carbohydrates or protein or fiber, which is basically non-caloric. So
stay with us. We'll be right back. Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we're the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
That was the thought process behind it. So if we just don't eat any fat, we're going to lose weight and it's going to be better for our heart. I'll get to the heart thing in a minute. But as far as the weight loss thing goes, that was well said, they were off on that too. Because what happens is, in a perfect world, that's true. That if you eat very low fat, you're most likely going to eat lower calories, but not if you replace it. And that's what people ended up doing because they just didn't understand the message. And I can't blame them for not understanding the message because the marketers, Nathan Pritikin, who, famously is a processing carb company, right? Pritikins, they jump all over that and start putting everything on their boxes, no fat, no fat, no fat. I don't know if you're old enough, but you remember Snackwell's, the non-fat cookies. It's like, oh man, great, I can eat all these and I won't get fat. Well, people started getting fatter through the 80s and 90s, right? And they're like, uh-oh, what are we doing wrong? Well, again, the experts already knew what you're doing wrong. It's human nature wants to be satiated. I mean, we just do. It's partly in our biology. That's why it takes a lot of discipline and mind control to say, I've had enough to eat. This is all I'm going to eat. Because we are kind of geared towards eating more than necessary. I mean, if you own pets, I shouldn't say own pets. I don't want to go off on my soapbox in that, but why do we get why do we own them? Don't they have their own lives? Anyway, little side note here. You can tell I'm kind of an animal lover here, but when you have pets and you put down the dog food for them, I can speak for Hazel, my dog, right? My dog. See, I did it again. So for Hazel, I'll put the food down. It is gone in 10 seconds. And if I put down another cup full of her kibble and then another tablespoon of her wet food, because that's kind of how I do it with her, she will eat all that. I don't know, and I'm not willing to do the experiment to see how many she would do because it's not good for her. But when would she get tired of that? I don't know. I mean, would she not get tired of it? And please don't try this at home. But the point is, we are kind of geared biologically speaking to eat as much as we can because we don't know. We come from hunter-gatherer roots. That's just what we come from. So we don't know. So again, it takes willpower and, discipline to say that is enough. And as I've always kind of said, weigh and measure. Like if we really know how much we're eating, probably helps us quite a bit. So humans were going to gravitate towards, I'm allowed to eat as much as I want. Well, again, we got fatter. It's not that like carbs became the bad guy. It's we replaced the fat with simply non-fat products, which are typically going to be either extremely lean protein or carbs, right? That's where your low fat comes from. So we just simply replaced one for another. And as I've said before, carbohydrates are just easy to eat a lot of. I mean, they're the go-to. Ever since I made this comment on one of the podcasts about carbohydrates a couple weeks ago, I've been getting so much grief in a joking way. They said, I want to see you eat 6 bagels in a row because I claimed I could. And I have a friend coming in from out of town and I said, I'll do it, So they're easy to eat. I mean, carbohydrates are easy to eat. So there's nothing evil about food. So we have to understand that. Going back to another important point with too much fat in the diet. Too much fat adds to too many calories. That's its problem number one. Problem number two, high saturated fat diets are linked to heart disease. They just are because they produce more cholesterol in your body, and then your cholesterol gets into your bloodstream and it starts to form plaque in the arteries. Okay, that's what saturated fat does. There's not any truth to if you eat higher cholesterol that it's going to raise your cholesterol. No, again, cholesterol is a sterol, it's a fat. When we eat saturated fats, it increases the amount of cholesterol in our body, which increases the amount of cholesterol in our bloodstream, which causes plaque, okay? And there absolutely is the data from the Framingham heart study to prove that too much saturated fat, regardless of calories, will lead to potential heart disease. When I say potential, we don't know what that would look like. Heart attack, stroke, it will definitely lead to cardiovascular disease unless you have some kind of freakish gene to protect you from it. But it is not good when we eat too much saturated fat. So that's another thing about fat. Now, when you consume the fat, again, what you don't utilize right away, so what you're not using for your energy, which is at rest or very low intensities right away, you're going to store it in the form of adipose tissue, which is fat. Cellulite, by the way, is not magical skin fat. It is literally just fat that you can see underneath the skin. That's all cellulite is, okay? It's a myth that it's this mystical kind of fat. Oh, I see cellulite. Okay, you're seeing fat. That's what it is. So when fat gets broken down, it gets broken down into free fatty acids, FFAs, free fatty acids. And that's what gets used for energy. Now you have omega-3 fatty acids and you have omega-6 fatty acids. And you probably hear those are good for you. Okay, there's been a lot of studies that implicate that they are good for you, that imply that they are good for you. So omega-3s are good potentially with different kinds of like inflammation, and you're going to get that in your fish and your fish oils and things like that. And omega-6s can be good for like a calming mechanism and protection with heart disease, kind of like taken in with fiber as well, which is also another good benefit to eating a higher fiber diet. But omega-6s are good, and you're gonna get those more from like nuts and things like that. And omega-3s are good, inflammation, and there's been research on both of them with brain health and things like that. It's all true, but we have to remember we can't have too much of anything. So too much free fatty acids means you're eating too much fat. And even though they're monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, which I will get to in a second, it's still too many calories. So it's not that it's bad for you. It's not. It is good for you. Study after study have shown that we need our omega-6s and omega-3s. But if we consume too many of them, it just means you're eating too many calories, all right? So that gets me to my final point on fat. You get people talking about, well, I know saturated fat is bad, but unsaturated fat, you can eat as much as you want of. That's not true. Both of them have 9 calories per gram. Both of them are calorically dense. Now, to keep it really simple, stupid, saturated fats, for the most part, other than palm oils, come from animal products. So saturated fat comes from animal products. So full fat dairy, beef, and even the fat, which is rare or not as high on chicken, is saturated fat. Unsaturated fat, which can be in the form of monounsaturated or polyunsaturated, comes from plants. So it's the oil in plants. Yes, it's healthier when you talk about the benefits and when you talk about heart disease, but it is still calorically dense. Now, I do tell people to really limit their amount of saturated fats, because saturated fats is just not going to do a lot for you. Like at least the mono and polyunsaturated fats, and for example, that would be like olive oil, canola oil, things like that, and some of the nut oils. I mean, again, they help build the hormonal system. They help with inflammation. They help with brain health. So at least there's a benefit to them. But there's not a benefit really to saturated fat other than clogging your arteries. I'm not saying don't eat it, because that's just never my rule. I never believe in nevers. I believe in moderation. Should you moderate your amount of saturated fat that you eat? Yes, without question, you should moderate your amount of saturated fats you should eat. So you should cut back on high fatty animal products for sure, because they just don't do a lot for you. I mean, the really high fat animal products are like not even high in protein compared to the fat content. So like 2 different animal products, using them in that form, are going to be, say, chicken and beef. So chicken's very low in fat and high in protein. I mean, when we're talking white meat, and beef is pretty much high in fat and medium in protein. So that's what it means when we say, maybe moderate your amount of saturated fat, because you're not going to get a lot out of that beef compared to, say, at least the protein content in the chicken. All right. And also, on a final note on that, unfortunately, with today's society, with how things are produced, you're going to be more likely to get more of the unnecessary steroids that are pumped into meat products these days when you eat meat. So I'm not saying don't eat meat by any means. Again, going back to my rule, I'm not one of those that says don't do this, don't do that. It's just we do have to be aware that the more heavily our diet is focused on meat, the more likelihood we are taking in different forms of hormones and things that we maybe do not want. And I know the same could be said for certain plants with pesticides. So all of that is absolutely true, but we do need to look at both sides of this. So the AMDR recommended macronutrient distribution is what that stands for, American Macronutrient Distribution. Well, that was easy to say. Anyway, the percentage that should be fat in your diet is roughly under 35%, no more than 35%, which is still fairly high. And the AMDR typically says between 20 and 35% of your diet should be in the form of fat. Now, when I analyze people's diets, typically the American diet is higher than that. And they're very low in carb because they've been fooled by the media. And I typically have to tell people, not always, endurance athletes, people that have been following health and fitness trends for a long time typically eat more carbohydrates because they've learned their lessons of being on a low carb diet and trying to exercise. It doesn't go very well. But oftentimes when I analyze a diet, I will see it way too high in fat and low in carbohydrates, because again, if it's high in fat, it's probably also higher in protein. But really what we want to do is understand that there's no evil macronutrients, and we need them all. And we need them all in their balance. So again, 20 to 35% of our diet should be fat, 40 to 60% of our diet should be carbohydrates, and roughly 15 to 20% of our diet should be protein, because I'm sure you remember from my protein talk that we don't need as much as we think. It's simply we need enough. Too much of it we store as fat. Too much fat we store as fat. Too many carbohydrates, well, at least we store a lot of it in glycogen. But then if we fill our glycogen and we still are eating more carbs, then we're going to store that as fat as well. All right, so we just can't get around it, people. Hope you learned something today. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's show. I ask you to please follow this show on wherever you get your podcasts, and also please hit automatic downloads. It really helps me and it helps the show. Now I want to thank Overhead Door of Daytona Beach, the premier garage door company in Volusia County, with the best product, with the best service. I can vouch for Jeff and Zach Hawk, the owners. They are great people. If you need any help with your garage doors, give them a shout. 386-222-3165.